What's going to happen today is we're going to think about our values and beliefs about behavior and how expectations can help our children understand what behavior we want. We're going to learn about the brain development and how it is related to behavior. And we're going to discuss what pushes our buttons. Practice reflecting and reframing so that we can reconnect.
Before we look at today's materials, I think it's important that we recap what we have focused on thus far. Some of you are joining us for the first time today, and we appreciate you spending time with us. Session 1 was entitled Making the Connection. We started off by defining the term social emotional development. Then we discussed some of the benefits as well as some of the barriers that parents face regarding spending time with their children. We provided a definition of positive descriptive acknowledgments, as well as gave some tips for how to use them in your everyday life. Some of them included encouraging your child with enthusiasm or doubling the impact of physical warmth. It can make the world of difference in the life of a child. Session 2 was entitled Playing and Positive Interactions. We again talked about some of the benefits as well as some of the barriers parents face as they play with their children. We went on a little further to provide some powerful parenting practice tips when playing with your children. Some of them included talking about what your child is doing, avoiding power struggles, and having fun. Many times, we know what we're supposed to do, but we fail to implement the knowledge that we have into action. By taking time to stop and think before we act, we can carefully and concisely apply the knowledge and experience we have gained. Our views and behaviors are molded by our family values, culture, beliefs, and information. Although two people may share the same views, opinions, it is important to work together for the benefit of the child. Take a moment to think about what are your beliefs on behavior? What ideas have you decided to bring into your own families as an adult that were shared with you when you were a child?
Let's talk about expectations for behavior for a moment. We can take our beliefs about behavior and create shared expectations at home. Expectations are a framework for the behavior that are expected for everyone in your home, children, teenagers, parents, and other adults. We have expectations for this group and for our schools. Also the expectations that we have for ourselves. These are, we are friendly and kind. We do that at school, we do that at home, we do that anywhere we meet other people. We are respectful, and we are safe and healthy. Expectations are carried out different ways for different ages. Make your expectations clear. Your child cannot read your mind. You have learned to tell your child what to do instead of what not to do. Expectations at home can take that one step further. You can use simple, broad statements that will guide what you tell your child to do. Expectation examples: our family is friendly and kind. Let your sister have a turn with the book. Help mommy set the table. Our family is respectful. Ask before you use something that is not yours. Our family is safe and healthy. We go to bed on time. Think about other ideas that you use at home that are good examples to tell your child what to do.
And now let's talk about brain development. When we look at brain development, this will help us gain a better understanding of how and why we have some of the reactions we do in regards to our children. Let's look at the forebrain, otherwise known as the upstairs brain. The responsibilities of the forebrain are logic, reasoning, and most importantly, impulse control. Our limbic brain or downstairs brain is responsible for attachment, contextual memory, learning, affect regulation, emotional reactivity, and appetite. And last but not least, we have our hindbrain. The hindbrain is responsible for motor regulation, balance, heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, and body temperature. And now, we're going to show you a short video by a lady named Jean Nielsen. She is an author, and the video will show you how brain development affects how we interact with our children.
Well, I want to do a little activity now that teaches you something about the brain. And so if all of you would just hold your hand up like this, and this, your hand now represents the brain. And from the palm of your hand down to the wrist, that's the midbrain, the primitive brain, that has a very important function. You know, it regulates all of your autonomic, like your breathing, your heart rate. Now bring your thumb into the palm of your hand, and this is the midbrain. And the midbrain is where you have the fight-flight response. And it's also where we store some of those old memories of inadequacy and fear and some of the judgments we've made about ourselves and others. Now bring your fingers down over that midbrain, and you've got the cortex. And the back of the cortex is where it regulates your senses, your touch, your sight, your feeling. And the front of the brain is the only place where thinking takes place, and especially the prefrontal cortex. And this is what regulates so many things like relationships and self-control and thinking, you know, rational thinking. And do you know what happens sometimes when you get upset? Like maybe you're upset about something that your ex-spouse has done or one of your children or whatever. Anyway, you get real upset. So guess what happens? Not as long as it's this way, but what happens is you flip your lid. And so what happens when you flip your lid? What is exposed? That's where you have the fight-flight response. And usually when you create that distance and hostility, the other person will flip their lid. And so this is when you're trying to communicate. You know, fight-flight response and old memories to fight-flight response. And it's like, you can think of this in your relationships with adults, but also with your kids. You know, often they do something, we get upset, they get upset. And is this the time to try and solve a conflict? And this is why it's when we understand this, and I often suggest that parents, as soon as their children are old enough, you teach them about this. And so that what you need to do is wait until you can calm down and engage your rational brain again. And this is where timeout goes. And you know, we talk a lot about not using negative timeout, where we say, you go think about what you did, which is one of the silliest things you can ever say to a child, as long as you can control what they're going to think about. But we do advocate positive timeout. And that's where you get your children to create a positive area that will make them feel good. And if you sit down with your children and you say, what would help you to feel good? Would it be an area that would have books and CDs and stuffed animals, cushions, or whatever it would be, and then let them name it something else. And the reason it's important to have them name it something else is because there's still that negative punitive connotation about timeout. And so my kids called it space or a cool down place. You know, my granddaughter decided to call it Bob. You know, it's like, but it really helps for them to be creative. And then instead of sending them there, it's so much more helpful if you ask them, would it help you to go to your feel-good place or to Bob? And but my feeling too, though, is if kids aren't old enough to understand this, they're not old enough to understand any kind of timeout. If they can't understand this, how can they understand what timeout means? Except, there's always exceptions. One woman after a lecture came up to me and she said how she had used this with an 18-month-old child because her 18-month-old child had a little silky pillow that she just loved. And so she'd be feeling upset or crying, and she said, would it help you to go lay on your silky pillow? And the little girl said, yes. And she'd say, you want me to go with you? And I love that. But sometimes she would just go with her. And this is another thing about positive time out that I suggest sometimes, that you just say, would it help you? And they might say no. And you say, would you like me to go with you? And they still say no. And they say, okay, I think I'll go to mine. And then you just turn around and go to yours, because isn't that a great model?
And now I want you to take a moment to think about some of the behaviors that your children do that flip your lid. In the video, Jane Nelson talked about what the term flipping your lid meant. So I want you to take a moment just to reflect on some of the behaviors that your children do that absolutely push your buttons. These buttons are often referred to as hot buttons. Now, these hot buttons and now I want us to take a moment and think about those behaviors that our children perform that flip our lid. In the video, Jane Nelson talked about what the term flipping our lid meant. With that being said, I want you to just take a moment to reflect on some of the behaviors that your children do that push your hot buttons. Oftentimes we see this in relationships. What may push one person's hot buttons may not push the other person's hot buttons or get to them so easily.
Let's look at managing personal stress. We're going to be reframing. So upsetting thoughts represents the problem. I can't handle getting ready in the morning anymore. My buttons are being pushed. Or, she ruins everything. I'm going to receive the worst Mother of the Year award. Now our calming thoughts, reframed statements. I am really feeling overwhelmed and I need to take some deep breaths. Or this is hard for her too. If I stay calm, we will both feel better. Now let's manage from children in reframing. And some upsetting thoughts represent the problem. He is just doing that on purpose. This is getting ridiculous. He'll never change. Or, she never sits still. I'm sick of dealing with these behaviors. But looking again at the calming thoughts, the reframed statement. He is working from his downstairs brain. He is trying to find where the limits are. Or her need to be moving is challenging for me at times.
So for today's training session, we developed our home expectations and provided examples. We thought about what our hot buttons were and even did some reframing. Once again, we wanted to take the time to thank you for visiting with us today. Please remember there will be a follow-up Zoom meeting, so be on the lookout for that information. We ask that you please bring all questions, comments, and concerns during that time. Session 4, entitled Feelings, Friendship, and Fun, will be posted December the 2nd, 2020. Thanks again, and remember to have fun with your children.